In the history of the NHL, there have always been players whose value came not from elite scoring or Hall of Fame skill, but from energy, physical play, and the ability to get under an opponent's skin. These are the role players, the agitators, the grinders, the depth forwards, yet some carried themselves as if they were stars, demanding attention far beyond what their ice time or production justified. Today we will look at 5 notable cases where NHL role players carried themselves like stars, from Sean Avery, whose ego was on full display, to Ben Eager, who taunted Roberto Luongo after scoring a blowout loss, to Zac Rinaldo, who proudly claimed he had changed the game after a hit that earned him an 8-game suspension. These are the NHL role players who thought they were stars. From the moment Sean Avery entered the league, he behaved as if the spotlight was made for him. Undrafted and eager to make a name, the forward joined a veteran Detroit Red Wings locker room and immediately announced himself. According to Sports Illustrated, Avery went into the dressing room of the Detroit Red Wings team, which was littered with Hall of Fame talent, and announced, "Call me a dog." The veterans quickly put the cocky rookie in his place. "You're no dog, you're a puppy," one quipped. It was an early sign of Avery's outsized ego. He hadn't even played a single NHL game yet he demanded a star's nickname in a room full of legends. Avery's flair only grew dramatic after that. Traded to the Los Angeles Kings in 2003, he found himself in Hollywood limelight, and he acted accordingly. He dated celebrities and was seen throughout LA hotspots, which irritated teammates who felt he was behaving more like a movie star without having earned it on the ice. Here was a guy who wasn't established, who was trying to lead the life of someone who had already made a name for himself. Teammate Jeremy Roenick recalled of Avery's Hollywood habits. Roenick had to remind him every single day how to do basic team etiquette. Say good morning, be one of the guys. He had to remind this to Avery every single day because Avery often alienated himself from teammates due to his self-centered antics. He loved to be the main character in any situation, even though his status was closer to journeyman than franchise player. On the ice, Avery carved out a role as an agitator, a pest who could chip in some offense, but even there he acted like the show was all about him. He led the NHL in penalty minutes while trash talking and not stepping down to anyone. "No one's been spared his commentary," said one opponent, noting that Avery showed no respect for the stars or veterans. He jawed icons like Martin Brodeur, knifed at fellow players in the media.
NHL for guys to fall in love with my sloppy seconds. I don't know what that's about, but enjoy the game tonight.
And even inspired a new league rule for unsportsmanlike conduct after he faced Brodeur and emphatically waved his hand and stick to distract the goalie during a playoff power play. That stunt as a whole, now known as the Avery rule, was so far over the line that even his own team was embarrassed. Devils forward John Madden called it childish, saying antics like this hurt the image of the game and the team. But Avery revealed the infamy of being the villain. He later complained that the NHL needed to promote its villains more, and that nobody cares about quiet stars like Jerome Igilna. "They don't bring enough to the game," and I quote. However, not everyone hated his act. Avery's act made him a fan favorite in New York. He gave the Rangers a jolt in 2007 with his edgy play and big personality. The team's record was better with him in the lineup, and Broadway media attention fit him like a glove. In 2007, Hockey News even polled players and named Avery both the league's most hated and most overrated player. That telling combo suggested that while Avery himself saw himself as a star, his peers saw him in a whole different picture. Indeed, as Rangers GM Dean Lombardi later revealed, Avery's actual league-wide value was low, and when Los Angeles tried to trade him, there was little interest around the NHL. Only a couple of teams even bothered calling, undermining Avery's own belief in his star appeal. The breaking point of Avery's self-image came in Dallas in 2008. The Stars signed him to a big free agent contract, 4 years, $15.5 million, perhaps validating Avery's high opinion of himself, but it turned into a fiasco. Avery couldn't resist controversy. In December 2008, he notoriously stepped in front of the TV cameras and made a crude remark about other players dating his ex-girlfriends, referring to them as his sloppy seconds. This attempt at grabbing headlines backfired. The NHL suspended him indefinitely, and the Dallas owner and teammates were livid. Co-GM Les Jackson said he was embarrassment to our team, to our city, and our owner. Coach and former TV commentator John Tortorella spoke of Avery on air, barking is enough, send him home. He doesn't belong in the league. Suddenly, the A-Dog found himself muzzled and sent away in disgrace. In essence, Avery's belief that he could say anything he wanted as a self-proclaimed NHL celebrity cost him his job. The Stars dropped him after just 23 games, forcing him to seek anger management counseling and restart his career in minor leagues. Avery did return to the NHL when the New York Rangers gave him a second chance, but he never shook the narrative that he overestimated himself. He continued to stir up drama in smaller doses until the Rangers cut him in 2011. By then, his on-ice role had diminished to near irrelevance. He was often a healthy scratch, with only 3 goals in 76 games that final season. In the end, Sean Avery will be remembered for his mouth and ego more than his hockey stats. A role player who acted like a star. However, long before Avery, there was Esa Tikkanen, a 1980s to 90s agitator, who in his own quirky way also behaved like he thought he was the star of the show. Tikkanen was a far more accomplished player on paper, a 5-time Stanley Cup champion with the Edmonton Oilers and later with the New York Rangers. Yet even on teams stacked with Hall of Famers, Tikkanen stood out for acting as if everyone came to see him. He was known league-wide for his caseless chatter and taunts, delivered in a hilarious mix of languages that came out to be as Tikkanese. On the ice, Tikkanen's job was usually to shadow the opposing team's best players, frustrating them with physical play and verbal barbs. He was excellent at his role, so much so that even Wayne Gretzky remarked on Tikkanen's constant yammering and dubbed his nonsense Tikkanese. No one sometimes, even fellow Finns, could decipher Tikkanen's chirps, but his relentless needling clearly got into opponents' heads. With a grin described as a bad boy grin, Tikkanen would bark questions like "How's your mom doing?" to star players, and then flash a mischievous smile, playing the part of an agitator who enjoyed every second of the spotlight. Tikkanen's mouth never truly rested. His own coaches and GMs acknowledged that Tikkanen was performing as much as he was playing. His mouth never rests. He's a showman, said Frank Moberg, who managed Tikkanen's Finnish club during an NHL lockout. Indeed, Tikkanen loved to put on a show. He'd whoop and holler during practices, mimic coaches' instructions in a cartoonish voice, and generally act like a court jester on skates. Teammates were equal parts amused and annoyed. At a 1998 press conference, veteran defenseman Joe Ricci joked that inside Tikkanen's head, there must just be a hamster running on a wheel, implying that his antics, well, were a bit nuts. Despite Tikkanen being a role player, a defensive forward, and agitator, Tikkanen had the confidence of a star. On those great Oiler teams, he chirped even at the most feared opponents, and sometimes even his own superstar teammates in practice. In interviews, Tikkanen spoke with pride about his role. He joked that in Europe, he had to take a vow of silence during a stint in Finland's league, where constant trash talk was less common, and it was a struggle for him. North American hockey, however, was his true stage, a place where he could just run everybody with hits and words. Tikkanen's chatter and antics fit perfectly in an era where dynasties could afford to carry a specialist whose main job was to get inside opponents' heads. But as the game evolved, agitators without elite skill became less about clever distractions and more about raw physical intimidation. This shift is where players like Zac Rinaldo came in. In the 2010s, Zac Rinaldo built a reputation as one of the league's most reckless enforcers, a player with minimal scoring but a knack for big hits and even bigger suspensions. Rinaldo's NHL role was clear: energy winger and occasional fighter, deployed for physicality, not finesse. Yet in his mind, Rinaldo often behaved as if he were a game-breaking force, even when his contributions were more harmful than helpful. A striking example of this came in January 2015, when Rinaldo, then with the Philadelphia Flyers, delivered a brutal hit from behind to Pittsburgh's defenseman Chris Letang. That hit earned him an ejection and eventually an 8-game suspension, but Rinaldo's reaction afterward truly illustrated his inflated self-view. Rather than issue an apology, he joked that his hit had changed the game in Philly's favor. Rinaldo openly boasted that his illegal play shifted momentum for the Flyers, as if injuring a star player and inciting chaos were a savvy strategy that he was proud of. It was a bold assessment from a player who on most nights logged minimal ice time and whose name rarely appeared on the score sheet. This wasn't an isolated incident. Rinaldo often seemed to lack the self-awareness of his status. After that hit, he even suggested he was being punished, not for the act itself, but because of who he hit. The implication was that if he had run over a no-name player, maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal. In Rinaldo's mind, the league was out to get him because he rattled star players. In other instances, on the ice, Rinaldo was a wrecking ball, sometimes effective, often uncontrolled. He racked up suspensions at an alarming rate. By 2017, he had been suspended 5 times in his NHL career, totaling 25 games, and fined multiple times. In contrast, he had only scored 11 career goals by that point. The stats say it all. Ronaldo's impact was overwhelmingly through hits and penalties, not actual production. Yet he carried on as if those hits were as valuable as goals. In one instance, after a particularly notorious incident where he sucker punched an opponent and caused a line brawl, Ronaldo claimed he was just defending himself and doing what needed to be done. Again, not fully grasping why people condemned the act, but Ronaldo brushed off the criticism, implying this is the way he plays the game. He did not adjust his self-image or style, despite multiple demotions to the AHL, and even trades. If anything, he embraced the role. But by 2021, he was out of the NHL, and he is now remembered more for his misplaced confidence of a grinder who thought havoc made him a star. However, constant chirping and borderline plays was also the specialty of another player, whose name was Maxim Lapierre. Lapierre fashioned a career of a classic agitator in the late 2000s and early 2010s. He was a bottom six forward with a big mouth and a knack for drawing penalties on opponents and occasional timely goals. Unlike Ronaldo, Lapierre wasn't an outright goon. He actually had some hockey skills and at times played important minutes, but what defined Lapierre was his attitude. He chirped, played on the edge, and often behaved as he was invincible on the ice. He seemed to believe he could yap at stars, deliver a cheap shot, and then skate away while someone else answered for it. Broadcaster Mike Milbury once flat out called Lapierre a punk who denigrates the game, labeling him the league's premier hit and run for stirring the pot and leaving others on his team to pay the price. Those words came after Lapierre's antics in the 2011 Stanley Cup final, which put his agitating style on a national stage. Playing for the Vancouver Canucks, Lapierre constantly tangled with the Boston Bruins, with after-whistle jabs and verbal barbs. In one notorious sequence, he taunted forward Patrice Bergeron by showing him his gloved fingers in his face, a cheeky move that infuriated Boston. He also famously scored the only goal in a crucial Game 5 of the final, and celebrated with the exuberance of a first-line sniper, basking in the spotlight. While that goal was genuine glory, much of Lapierre's series was spent antagonizing and then backing off, earning him that punk label from Milbury on national TV. His self-confidence was sky high for a player of his resume. In the Habs, where he started, he quickly became known for his gab. Teammates and reporters observed that Lappy could run his mouth with the best of them, chirping opponents at every turn. He played as he were a vital cog, and indeed, he did have a strong playoff with Montreal in 2010, but he rarely backed up his talk with physical retaliation himself. He had a reputation for talking big, but dropping the gloves very rarely. In fact, a St. Louis blog later noted that Lapierre had only broken 20 points once in his career, and hardly ever fought, despite acting as an enforcer type best. In other words, his actual hockey output was modest to say the least, usually single-digit goals, around 10 to 15 points a season, and while he hit and annoyed, he wasn't the one squaring off and backing up those big words. Others saw him as a player who overestimates his toughness and importance, hiding behind more skilled and tougher teammates after instigating trouble. In October 2013, Lapierre, then with the Blues, hit San Jose Dan Boyle from behind, knocking the star defenseman out cold. Earlier that game, Lapierre had taunted the Sharks from the bench, saying he was coming after them, which made the hit look premeditated. Lapierre was later suspended for this action, and even the Blues fans grew tired of his antics, as local writers noted he added little besides cheap shots and chirps, and that he did not back the ego he had. But this wasn't new. He often pushed the boundaries, then acted surprised at the backlash. He only apologized for the hit after heavy criticism, and at first insisted it wasn't a big deal. Coaches tolerated him because he could kill penalties, win draws, and agitate, but his ego overweighed his production, and by the end of his career, his ice time dwindled and he left for Europe. With just 65 goals in 614 games, he was never more than a role player, yet his mouth, ego, and the villain persona kept him in the spotlight, and made him think he was some kind of star player when he truly wasn't. Ben Eager, on the other hand, had no problem throwing his weight around. A fast, physical winger with size, Eager's impact came through big hits and raw energy, but like Lapierre, he often pushed past the line of usefulness, letting his emotions and ego take over in moments when his team needed control. Ben Eager was a fourth-line power forward of the late 2000s, big, fast, physical, and always willing to drop the gloves. He even earned the Stanley Cup ring with the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks as a depth player, but Eager's temperament sometimes got the better of him, especially when he started to believe his own hype. In one notorious episode, Eager demonstrated how a role player's momentary glory can go straight to his head with embarrassing results. The scene was Game 2 of the 2011 Western Conference Final, Vancouver vs San Jose. Eager, by then with the Sharks, was playing his usual crash and bang style. Late in the game, with Vancouver routing San Jose 7-2, Eager scored a goal, a meaningless tally in garbage time, making it 7-3. Instead of humble celebration, Igor seized the moment to provoke. He taunted Vancouver's goaltender, Roberto Luongo, after scoring, barking at him despite the score. As he circled past the Canucks bench, Igor was yapping and smiling, acting as if he had turned the tide of the game. In reality, the Sharks were still being blown out, and Igor's goal was about as consequential as a preseason marker. To make matters worse, in his excitement, Igor took a bad roughing penalty for running Luongo while celebrating, immediately putting his team short-handed. It was pure sideshow. Igor made himself the center of attention for a personal triumph that did nothing to change the outcome of the game. In fact, his antics hurt the team's effort to mount any respectable comeback. The media and hockey observers were quickly to point out the display of ego. The hockey news dubbed it as a sideshow routine and named Igor the game's black hole for his foolish penalties and taunting in a blowout loss. Boneheaded, one recap called his behavior, noting he racked up 20 penalty points and acted somewhat stupidly with his late game antics. Even Igor's own teammates and coaches had to question what he was thinking. Sharks coach Todd McClellan, while appreciating Igor's energy and passion, admitted he was both an asset and a liability in that game, praising the effort but condemning the needless penalties. Igor's career followed that pattern. Flashes of impact undermined by poor judgment. He saw himself as an enforcer who could change games, but more often than that, he fueled opponents and hurt his own team. His career high was just 7 goals, and while he played a death role in Chicago's 2010 Cup run, his attempts to step into the spotlight usually backfired. Off the ice, his discipline flattered too, with incidents like a bar fight reflecting the same lack of control. His story is one of overestimation. He thought toughness made him a star. In reality, it made him expendable, once his penalties overweighed his contributions. For every shift, there was a costly mistake, and when role players forget their limits, the fall comes quick.